12 minutes. That is all it took. 12 minutes inside the most powerful building on Earth, and the political architecture of an entire continent began to crack. Donald Trump did not negotiate. He did not deliberate. He stood up, pointed directly at Ursula von der Leyen, and delivered 4 words that no European leader has ever heard, directed at them from an American president. The cameras were cut within seconds. Staff were ordered out of the room. But one sentence had already escaped into the corridors of power, and by the time it reached Brussels, Europe was no longer sleeping. It was in full, uncontrollable panic. The meeting was never supposed to go this way. Every protocol had been followed. Every diplomatic courtesy had been extended. Ursula von der Leyen arrived at the White House with a team of senior advisors, a prepared framework document, and the quiet confidence of someone who had navigated the corridors of global power for years. She had survived COVID. She had managed the Ukraine crisis. She had stared down energy blackmail from Moscow without flinching. But nothing, not a single moment in her political career, had prepared her for what happened inside that room. According to sources with direct knowledge of the meeting, the atmosphere shifted within the first 90 seconds. Trump entered not with the customary handshake and pleasantries, but with a document already in his hand. Not the EU's document, his own. A counter-briefing, described by one insider as a ledger of grievances running back over a decade. He placed it on the table without a word, sat down, and looked at von der Leyen with an expression that multiple witnesses have since described using the same word: contempt. The EU delegation had come prepared to discuss Agenda 2026, their renewed partnership framework that proposed stabilising current trade arrangements, maintaining joint Ukraine funding commitments, and opening dialogue on digital taxation reform. It was, by every measure, a reasonable document, a professional document, the kind of document that, in any previous administration, would have been received with at least the performance of diplomatic consideration. Trump did not read it. He slid it to the side of the table without opening it and said, according to the leaked account now circulating among senior EU officials, I already know what's in it, and the answer is no. What followed those words is what has sent shockwaves through every capital in Europe, because Trump did not stop at no. He kept going, quietly, methodically, and with the kind of deliberate calm that is far more dangerous than any raised voice. He began listing what he called the accumulated debts of the transatlantic relationship. Not metaphorical debts, numerical ones. The $350 billion annual trade imbalance absorbed by the United States from the Eurozone. The chronic underfunding of NATO commitments by Germany, France, Spain, and Italy. The digital service taxes levied by EU member states against American technology companies. Taxes that Washington views not as policy, but as targeted economic aggression. He presented each figure not as a complaint, but as a closing argument. And then he stood up. That moment, Trump rising from his chair mid-meeting, is what triggered the immediate security response. Staff moved. Cameras were physically redirected. One aide reportedly stepped in front of a recording device. But the words that came next were already out. They had been heard by at least 6 people in that room. And within the brutal efficiency of modern leak culture, they were already moving through encrypted channels before the door had closed behind the departing American president. What he said, the exact sentence that escaped, has not been confirmed by the White House. It has not been denied either. And in Washington, the absence of a denial from this administration is itself a statement. Brussels understands this, which is precisely why, within 40 minutes of the meeting's abrupt conclusion, emergency calls were being placed between Paris, Berlin, Warsaw, and Rome. Not scheduled calls. Emergency calls, the kind that bypass assistance and go directly to heads of state. The euro began trembling against the dollar before the financial markets in Frankfurt had even registered what had happened politically. The DAX moved first, dropping 3.8% in after-hours trading as institutional investors, people with access to information the public does not yet have, began repositioning. Volkswagen, BMW, BASF. The industrial spine of European economic power started bending under a pressure it had not anticipated and had made no contingency plan to absorb. Inside the Berlaymont building in Brussels, the mood shifted from confusion to something closer to controlled terror. Senior Commission officials who had been briefed on the meeting's outcome were, according to multiple EU diplomatic sources, unwilling to speak on record, unwilling to speak off record, and in several cases, unwilling to speak at all. One senior figure, described only as a member of von der Leyen's inner circle, told a trusted contact a single sentence before going silent. This is not what we planned for. But here is the detail that the mainstream media is either missing or deliberately avoiding. The meeting's failure was not an accident. It was not a miscalculation. There are now serious, credible indications emerging from within the transition intelligence community that Trump's team had known for 72 hours that the EU delegation was coming with a framework that would be rejected. They had prepared the counter-document in advance. They had selected the room. They had controlled every variable of that encounter with surgical precision. Because this was never a negotiation. It was a message, delivered in 12 minutes, to an entire continent. And the most dangerous question now burning through the highest levels of European political power is one that nobody wants to say out loud. If this was just the message, what exactly is the punishment? The punishment, it turns out, was already in motion before von der Leyen's plane had left American airspace. While the EU delegation was still processing the humiliation of an abruptly ended White House meeting, Trump's trade team was quietly activating the legal machinery of Section 300, one of the Trade Act of 1974. This is not a warning tool. This is not a negotiating instrument. Section 301 is the nuclear option of American trade policy, a mechanism that allows the executive branch to unilaterally impose sweeping tariffs and market restrictions on any nation deemed to be engaged in unfair trade practices against the United States. It has only been fully invoked a handful of times in modern history. The fact that it is now being prepared against the European Union, America's oldest and largest trading partner, is not a policy shift. It is a civilizational rupture. Sources inside the office of the United States Trade Representative confirm that the preliminary filing was completed within hours of the White House meeting's conclusion. The document reportedly identifies 3 specific areas of EU economic conduct that Washington now classifies as hostile trade behaviour: the digital service taxes, the automotive subsidy structures protecting German manufacturers, and most explosively, the EU's regulatory framework governing American agricultural imports, a system that Washington has privately described for years as a disguised trade barrier dressed in the language of consumer protection. If Section 301 is formally triggered, European exports face immediate tariff exposure estimated between 25% and 40% across multiple sectors simultaneously. The economic modelling being circulated inside Brussels right now describes the impact in one word: unsurvivable. But the economic dimension, as catastrophic as it is, may not even be the most dangerous front opening up against Europe right now. Because simultaneously, and this is the part that has genuine intelligence officials across the continent losing sleep, the security architecture that has protected Europe since 1949 is being quietly, deliberately, and irreversibly dismantled. Pentagon sources confirm that the previously scheduled joint military exercises between US and European NATO forces for the coming quarter have been placed under administrative review. That phrase, administrative review, is diplomatic language for suspension. American logistical support for the eastern flank, particularly the supply chain infrastructure supporting operations near the Polish and Baltic borders, is being audited for what officials are calling strategic necessity reassessment. Translation: Washington is asking out loud in official documents whether defending Europe is still in America's national interest. That question alone, the mere fact that it is being asked formally rather than dismissed as political theatre, has triggered a crisis of confidence inside NATO headquarters in Brussels that no press conference and no carefully worded joint statement can paper over. Because everyone inside that building knows the operational truth that the public is not being told. Without American intelligence sharing, without American satellite infrastructure, without American rapid deployment capacity, European defence is not weakened. It effectively ceases to exist as a credible deterrent. Macron knows this, Scholz knows this, and most terrifyingly, Moscow knows this too. Which raises the question that is now consuming every serious strategic mind from Warsaw to Lisbon: is what happened in that White House room in 12 minutes about to reshape the entire security map of the world? And has Vladimir Putin already received his copy of the memo? Vladimir Putin did not make a public statement the day the White House meeting collapsed. He didn't need to. In the language of geopolitical signal and counter-signal, silence from Moscow at a moment of maximum Western vulnerability is not restraint. It is satisfaction. And the silence coming out of the Kremlin in the hours following the von der Leyen humiliation was so deliberate, so perfectly timed, that senior analysts inside both MES, SIX and the BND, German foreign intelligence, began flagging it internally as a response in itself. Putin had watched, Putin had noted, and Putin, according to sources with visibility into Kremlin internal communications, had described the White House meeting's outcome to his inner circle using a single Russian word that translates, with uncomfortable precision, as opportunity. That word is now the most frightening word in European geopolitics, because opportunity, in Putin's strategic vocabulary, has a very specific meaning. It does not mean dialogue, it does not mean negotiation, it means the identification of a moment when an adversary is distracted, divided, and diplomatically isolated, and the quiet, methodical exploitation of that moment before the adversary has time to recover. Europe has seen this playbook before. It watched it unfold in Crimea in 2014. It watched it again in the early hours of February 2022. And now, with American commitment to European security openly questioned at the highest levels of the United States government, the conditions that made both of those moments possible are not just returning. They are arriving in a form more dangerous than anything the continent has faced in the post-Cold War era. The timing is not coincidental. It never is with Moscow. Within 48 hours of the White House meeting, Russian military logistics activity along the Belarusian corridor increased by a margin that NATO's own monitoring systems flagged as statistically significant. No invasion, no mobilization, just movement. Just enough movement to be seen. Just enough to remind every defense ministry from Tallinn to Bucharest that the eastern horizon has not become safer. It has become exponentially more uncertain at the precise moment that the American umbrella is being folded. Inside Brussels, the emergency summit convened by von der Leyen, in the immediate aftermath of her return from Washington, has produced, according to leaked readouts now circulating among senior EU diplomatic staff, almost nothing of substance. The meeting lasted 4 hours. It generated a communiqué of 11 paragraphs. And according to 3 separate sources present in the building during the session, not a single concrete financial commitment, not a single binding defence pledge, and not a single unified political position emerged from those 4 hours of deliberation. What did emerge was something far more revealing. A fracture line running directly through the centre of the European project itself. Hungary and Slovakia refused to sign the emergency communiqué. Not abstained, refused. Viktor Orban, whose relationship with both Trump and Putin has long made him the most structurally disruptive figure inside EU institutional politics, left the summit early and within hours was on a call, unscheduled, unannounced, and subsequently confirmed by 3 independent diplomatic sources, with a senior member of Trump's national security team. What was discussed on that call has not leaked. But the fact that it happened, at that precise moment, immediately after a failed EU emergency summit, tells every serious observer of European politics everything they need to understand about the internal coherence of the bloc that is now supposed to be mounting a unified response to the greatest external pressure it has ever faced. The European Union is not just facing an American president who has decided to walk away. It is facing that external pressure while simultaneously fracturing from within. And the fracture lines between North and South on economic policy, between East and West on security posture, between Orban's Budapest and virtually every other capital on the question of democratic values, did not appear this week. They have been widening for years. What Trump's 12-minute White House meeting did was not create those fractures. It simply removed the diplomatic insulation that had been keeping them from becoming fully visible to the world. Von der Leyen herself is now facing something she has never faced at this intensity before, a direct, public, and growing challenge to her personal political survival. The interference dossier that Trump's team has reportedly compiled, the file allegedly detailing EU institutional funds flowing to NGOs that actively campaigned against his election, has not been released, but it has been referenced, twice, in communications that were intended to be private and have since been shared with journalists who are, for the moment, sitting on the material. The moment that dossier becomes public, and every intelligence assessment currently circulating suggests it will become public, von der Leyen's position becomes functionally untenable. Not difficult, not challenged, untenable. The 30-day ultimatum is not a negotiating timeline. Every serious trade lawyer, every former WTO official, every diplomatic veteran who has been consulted in the 72 hours since the White House meeting has said the same thing in different language. 30 days is not enough time to restructure a trade relationship built over 5 decades. It is not enough time to reorganise defence funding commitments that require parliamentary ratification across 27 sovereign legislatures. 30 days is enough time to demonstrate compliance or to demonstrate defiance. Those are the only 2 options the timeline was designed to produce. And whichever option Europe chooses it publicly, visibly, and with consequences that cannot be walked back. If they comply, The European Union confirms to every adversary, every wavering member state, and every watching population across the continent that it is not a sovereign geopolitical actor. It is a tributary. If they refuse us, the full weight of American economic and diplomatic pressure lands on an already fragile European economy at the worst possible moment in a generation. There is no third door. Trump's team made certain of that. And so tonight, as emergency calls continue between capitals that are running out of things to say to each other, as markets prepare for an opening bell that nobody in Frankfurt or Paris is looking forward to, and as the eastern horizon grows darker in ways that have nothing to do with the weather, the question that history will eventually demand an answer to is already forming. Was the European Union always this fragile? Or did it take exactly 12 minutes, one pointed finger, and one escaped sentence to finally show the world what was hiding beneath the surface all along? The clock is running. The 30-day deadline is not a headline, it is a detonator. And every hour that passes without a unified European response is another hour that Washington, Moscow, and every watching power on this planet banks as confirmation of exactly what Trump declared in that room. History does not wait for the unprepared. Subscribe now and turn on notifications, because when that deadline hits, this story will explode in ways that nobody in the mainstream media is ready to cover. You cannot afford to be late to this one.